Hello, everybody. My name is Kirk. Welcome to Artful Tuesdays. And I have a special guest today, Diane Durante. And we're going to be talking about the visual to the verbal in paintings. And we're going to be talking about a upcoming conference, Resurrecting Romanticism in Spartanburg, South Carolina. But first, before we talk about some of the talks that Dr. Durante will be giving at this conference, or she'll be participating in a panel, she'll be giving a talk. We're going to talk about some teasers, and we're going to help you get, some of what is actually going to happen there. I actually want to show you a little bit about who Diane is. I've actually interviewed and talked to her before. I've purchased some of her books. I'm a big fan of her process because I've learned a lot. So as a lot of you who watch this show know, I'm always interested in how to enhance my experience with art. I didn't grow up with art. I was always afraid of it. I always thought it was silly and a waste of time. And it was through Ayn Rand's work and Leonard Peikoff's work that I really discovered that art is not a frill or some nice thing that rich people do. And I go to the movies like a trucker, but it's something fundamental to your consciousness and to your life. So real quick. So first off, hi, Diane.
Hello. It's a pleasure to see you again.
Yeah. Welcome to the show. Daniel, can you put up that first slide so we could just real quick point out some of these things? So this is some of Dr. Durante's work in her books. I think your most recent one is the Getting More Enjoyment. Is that correct? Out of the sculpture you love? Because that's one you and I talked about on our show a while back.
Yeah, that and the Innovators books were probably the most recent in art history.
Okay, so we have the Innovators in Sculpture, Innovators in Painting, Seismic Shift in Subject and Style, which I have not read, but I really want to get that one. I might even tease on this show, like kind of slip in, because I'm interested in that, the shifts that happen.
And that is all on 19th century, which is the period that Romanticism originated in. But I'm actually just getting that prepared for a print edition. So it'll be out in a couple of weeks or a month.
Then I will try to have you back on and buy a book for that one, buy that one. And then at the financial programs of Alexander Hamilton, which is a little bit different, it seems like, than the other ones.
Well, yeah, I do history and I do art history. And
history and art history.
Yeah, the Hamilton one was fun because it's so far out of my comfort zone. I really don't do economics, but I do primary source research. And I thought it was time somebody looked at the primary sources and tried to figure out what Hamilton's motives were, rather than, for instance, looking at him as a scholar of von Mises and saying, well, he doesn't agree with von Mises on this and this and this, or doesn't agree. Yeah. So
sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think there's a value that I don't see as much in historians and economists in really reading like classic literature, the paintings, the sculpture, the music of the time, because that, isn't just like, again, it's not a side aspect of life or what, especially in the 19th century, but any life, it really informs all of the thought. And, I'm actually doing something called the Literary Canon Club, where we're reading through the classics literature, and we're reading Milton right now, Paradise Lost, and just how much more I think people start to grasp the interregnum, the Civil War in England, colonialism at the time, through that work is just so much better than, I think like a Wikipedia style history book.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
The timeline book, the second from the left on the top, I'm writing a follow-up that covers 1700 and 1900. And once I have decided what the really important works are in the different fields of literature, I'm planning to sit down and read them, or at least part of them, if there's something I just can't stand. But I think it'll be really, really interesting to read them in chronological order with knowledge of what was going on in economics and politics and music. And it's going to be so much fun. The people who read it will not have nearly as much fun as I'm having writing it. It's okay.
Yes, they definitely will. But let's jump into Resurrecting Romanticism, the conference. Again, just as a reminder, this starts October 7th. I think last time I did a show, they told me there was October 6th, there was a special like little mixer that you'd come. So you can come the day before. So but it officially starts October 7th in Spartanburg, South Carolina. And Dr. Durante will be on 3 different, well, not panels, but you'll be giving 3 different talks, panels and talks.
Yes.
Paintings and Romanticism. Make sure I'm getting this right. That's one. Is that the panel?
No, that's the opening speech.
Okay, that's
for
the
conference.
Okay, so the opening.
I'm actually the first speaker.
You're the first speaker, paintings and romanticism. And this is where you're going to go into the verbal or the visual to the verbal.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. And you're going to talk about narratives and free will and romanticism, essentially. Very cool. And I'm very interested. That one sounds really amazing too. The second one, again, I don't know the order, Nurturing the New Romantics.
I think
Is that a panel?
Sunday. Yeah, that's a panel.
Okay, that one's a panel.
Yeah.
And then
I'm going to talk about that in a couple of minutes, and I'll read you off the names.
Okay, yeah. And then art at the 1893 Chicago World's Fair. And that's where we're going to start here of talking a little bit about this. So first off, do you want us to have the slide up for this 1893 World Fair?
Let's see. Yeah, put up the one that says slide 1893A.
Okay. So this is going to be a talk by you, or is this a panel as well?
This is actually the morning session on Columbus Day.
Okay, so
so
good.
Columbus Day in 2023 is 130 years after the Columbian Exposition.
Okay.
And
go ahead, yeah.
So we're looking at the context, and then we're looking at the art specifically. So let me tell you the context first.
Yeah.
From the end of the Civil War, American Civil War in 1865 until around 1900, the U.S. became world-class in manufacturing, in technology, in finance. This is the period that saw the creation of Standard Oil, Carnegie Steel, the completion of the transatlantic cable, the completion of the transcontinental railroad. And aside from those very, very major accomplishments, it saw the invention of the telephone, the phonograph, the incandescent bulb, the typewriter, the sewing machine, all kinds of inventions in that 40 or so year span. Europeans acknowledged that we were really, really good at this technical industrial stuff, but they felt we were kind of lagging behind in culture. So the US decides to celebrate the 400th anniversary of Columbus's arrival in America with a huge World's Fair in Chicago. There was bidding for who would have it, and ended up in Chicago. Years ago, a guy named Eric Larson wrote a book called The Devil in the White City. That's about this fair. And if you're interested, he does a really good description of the fair, but the alternating chapters are following this mass murderer. So I have my permission to just ignore the mass murderer chapters because you don't need them. But his description of the fair and how it was set up and carried on is really interesting.
But is Eric Larson, is he the dragon tattoo person?
No,
author?
That's
okay. I don't know if I know Eric.
Can't remember his name, but not the same guy.
Okay, good.
Okay, so the Columbian Exposition was meant to be a showcase for American achievements, and not just industry, but culture. So at the conference, we're going to have Steve Seek, who was on 2 weeks ago, talk about the general context for the Columbian Exposition. I'm going to talk for half an hour on painting. Sandra Shaw is going to talk for half an hour on sculpture that was exhibited there. And Thomas Schubatham and Stephen Seek are going to talk about classical and pop music at the Columbian Exposition, which includes people like John Philip Sousa and Scott Joplin, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah. So
my bit is painting. Can you give me slide 1893B? Okay. So the Fine Arts Building had works by hundreds of American painters and sculptors, and many of them were trained by the best artists in the world who were in Paris. So the 1893 fair is not just showing American achievements, it's one-upping the French. Who just had in 1893 a huge exposition in Paris, and they showed off their art, and they built a centerpiece for it, the Eiffel Tower. That's the centerpiece for the 1889 exposition. And the people in Chicago were just dead set on outdoing the French. And the painters and the sculptors were also looking to one-up the French. So they have the French very much in mind. It's not anymore a Native American tradition just going on. They're thinking about what the French are doing, and can we do that better? Can we technically do it as well? Can we improve on their subjects or their technique? Let's see. Give me 1893C. So they do they show some gorgeous pictures, technically really, really good, benevolent sense of life usually. And in many ways, it's just a delight to be immersed in the art of this period. Give me D, as in David. In some ways, it's also sad because I can see the elements coming in that are going to make that type of spirit disappear. And that is something that I'm going to cover at the end of this talk, and probably talk about in the talk on nurturing the new romantics as well.
So
because it's just fascinating.
Yeah. So basically, if I understand what's happening, is you're saying in this 1893 fair, this obviously is coming after the Civil War. It's the rise of America as an industrial nation.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a kind of almost a cultural, spiritual symbol, almost this moment, this event is kind of celebrating it. It's got the best of the best and all that they can offer in America. Like, this is what America is. I cannot honestly think of anything equivalent today that we have like this. Maybe, I don't know if you could think of anything, but nothing where it's like we really put all of our best achievements in we could say in cinema and sculpture and discoveries.
The World's Fairs have really petered out. I can remember Expo 1970. There were a couple in New York before that, but you don't hear of the US putting on World's Fairs anymore. And I think that's a change in the spirit, and not in a good way.
That's what I was going to say. You could see it, and there's like conferences. We have lots of conferences all over, but we don't have like one place that we acknowledge as the best of the best. And that's what this is. We do have that for sports. Maybe. Yeah.
And there were millions of people who came to this and remembered it vividly. In fact, the whole City Beautiful movement, whatever you think of it, is very much a result of the Chicago Exposition in 1893, because they had, I have arguments with people about this. It's just, they imposed all this classical architecture, and they shouldn't have done that, and it wiped out American architecture for the next 30 years. There's some truth in that, but they ended up putting this fair together in 2 years flat in a big empty space south of Chicago. And they wanted it to look impressive, cohesive. They have 6 or 7 major architects working on the different buildings. All of them knew the classical style. So if you wanted something that looked cohesive, that was going to be it. You can talk about Louis Sullivan, and I love Louis Sullivan, and he's got the only building that doesn't look like a classical thing, but mostly they wanted something that was coherent, and classical is what worked.
Yeah, and so when we think about, Ayn Rand's Romantic Manifesto, and she kind of refers to herself as a bridge between two worlds, in a sense, where she is, she comes after this, of course. She's born, 1905. So it's after, but she still kind of saw glimmerings of this in her youth, of this kind of sense of life, this culture that it really admired greatness. And if you could imagine living in the 1890s as someone with ambition, someone who wanted to get into the arts, and you would flock to this place to learn from people, to see the best, and to, maybe admire and idealize, like, I'm going to do that one day. Yeah. And, I think we still have some of that. Again, I don't want to say that we have like the worst culture ever, but we definitely don't have it to this degree. We don't have pockets. It's pockets. Pockets.
You have to know where to look.
Like that. And, so part of what I understand your talk is going to kind of really flesh out this event in cultural time, at Resurrecting Romanticism. So it's Resurrecting Romanticism is the title, right? And so you're going to kind of maybe pull out little nuggets of wisdom and insights about this era that are applicable to us today, and to maybe help us see the importance of trying to work today to bringing back some more of the glimmerings of that romanticism. And this kind of leads, go ahead.
Even if you don't want to work toward it, there's a benefit to your soul to seeing the kind of art that's inspiring, that's uplifting, that's well executed.
Yeah.
And it's a benefit of being at the conference if you're not a performing artist or teacher or whatever, but just being in that mindset for 3 days, it's going to be good. It's going to be really, really good.
Yeah. And some of the benefits, let's real quick before we move on to the nurturing the new romantics, which is your panel discussion that we'll talk about real quick. So part of the advantage is that you get to kind of live in this world. You get to remember, what it's like for all these people to want to see a new discovery, want to, admire that moment. I mean, can you think what other types of advantages to today can you think of that it, provides to live in that kind of world, even for a day or two? To your soul, to your life,
it re-energizes you. If the objectivist conferences generally energize me, but there's a lot of talk about politics, things that are wrong, economics, dreadful states of this and that. And this is all true, and you need to know it to work at it, but there is an advantage to just seeing something beautiful, experiencing something fantastic.
Yeah. Absolutely. And so part of your mission is to, I don't know if it's your mission, maybe I don't know, you tell me, but part of what you're trying to achieve is you want to see more of this romantic art, more better art, more, something new in the future. And that seems to be part of what's the spirit behind resurrecting romanticism. Yeah. And so you're going to do a panel on this. And I thought maybe you could tell me and tell us, like, what are some of your thoughts on how that's possible? Is it possible? Because to me, it feels like maybe it's not. Maybe it's like we're 100 years away. And the best we could do is just kind of all of us get together, hold hands, and just enjoy a little bit of it and just say of the past. And we're not going to really, but why do you think we can nurture it still?
Well, I think that in order to get it back, you have to be exposed to it in the first place. Why would you reinvent this particular wheel if you can listen to Rachmaninoff, if you can see great paintings, great sculpture? That helps you. Any aspiring artist needs to see the best in his field. Let me talk about who's going to talk in this.
Sure.
There is David.
No, I said sure. Yeah.
Okay. David Barry, whom you talked to, Sandra Shaw, who's a sculptor, as you know, Thomas Schubotham, Stephen Seek, and Quent Cordair is going to moderate it. And the question that the schedule online poses is, what would a rational curriculum look like in today's universities, art, and music schools? Which I take to mean, how do we teach and encourage artists who can produce new works that are even more inspiring than 19th century works? So I am not an artist myself. I talk about art, but I've never gone to an art school. So I came up with questions rather than answers, because I think we should really leave it to people who've experienced it to contribute more than that. But I think there are two parts. And the first is technique. Even basic things like perspective have been lost since our abstract art took over in the 20th century. People just don't know how to do a perspective drawing. All the sort of innovations that I list in Innovators in Sculpture, Innovators in Paintings, you wouldn't get those in most art schools. They just don't see the need. But aside from the technique, you have to have content as well. You have to somehow get the content. And I'm thinking of that because in the 1893 talk, I end with a quote from Bouguereau. Give me the quote, the slide, nurturing one. I think there's only one nurturing. Yes, there you go. So on the left is a painting by Bouguereau, and the ones on the right are by Gauguin and Monet and Cézanne. So Bouguereau is a highly respected teacher. A lot of Americans go to Bouguereau. A lot of French painters do too. He wins awards in the French salons. He's really technically very good, creative, imaginative, but he can't defend his work. And this is Bouguereau in 1899, speaking about the works of artists like this, quote, "I'm very eclectic, as you see. I accept and respect all schools of painting which have as their basis the sincere study of nature, the search for the true and the beautiful. As for the mystics, the impressionists, the pointillists, etc., I don't see the way they see. That is my only reason for not liking them." End of quote. There are many reasons for not liking them, but Bouguereau doesn't know what they are. And he is one of the best trained painters of his period, of the late 19th century. So at some point, you have to show aspiring artists what the right ideas are. But you can't just force them to memorize the Romantic Manifesto. That is not going to have the desired effect. So the kind of questions that I would like answered are, when do you start? What age do you start? What topics do you start with? What's the hierarchy? Do you start by showing them great works? Do you start by talking about philosophy? And how do you teach them to keep their own voice while they're looking at all this other great art and learning all of these other points of view? Because that's always been a problem. Just, becoming imitative. You have to learn many things, but you have to still keep your own sense of life point of view. So that's the kind of questions that I would like to hear discussed. And I think the people on this panel will do a really interesting job of it.
Yeah, it seems like a challenge. I'm very curious of those answers, because it seems like such a challenging thing in today's world where, young kids are going to be exposed to different types of popular art and career paths that lead to success. And if they look at, someone who's, I have to use like an example of Howard Rourke who never made a success of it type thing, like someone who stuck to it. Like that's the image, I think, which is why the Fountainhead is so powerful for someone to see that it's possible in some level. But, like if you want to be a musician, you have to think, well, I have to get on Spotify. I have to figure out how to get lots of songs produced over and over. There's certain practical things that are so difficult. And I don't know if I think they've always been difficult, but the marketplace is so, to me, it's just so diffuse and challenging. Maybe it's a blessing and a curse. I don't know, but I just find it really challenging to kind of try to inspire a young person to dedicate the kind of time necessary to the craft when there's not very many positive examples of the success of the field. And so I think that has to be a primary discussion point for them, right? Because they have to be able to see that they're going to at least have a chance at success.
Right.
In life. They don't want, like, who wants to be a starving artist, really?
Yeah, I agree.
I don't think anyone wants that.
It is a difficult, it is a tough question. And I'm looking forward to hearing what they, because I don't have the answer.
Yeah, no, I don't either.
And
I have questions as well. And I will just say from my perspective, I do think there's a value in at least from teachers, the reverence of greatness in the past, and to identify and say, this is great and why it's great. Yeah. I think at the bare minimum, that's something we need to bring back into schools that we don't have anymore. Right. And, not to say that everything today is crap and you have to make your own decision, although I think a lot of it is.
Yeah, but, but everything is not equal. You have to be able to say.
And you have to be able to, and they don't do that. People just today in school will say that, some random rap song is as good as, a great, classic poem of Tennyson or something. It's like, on what standards? And so that I think is valuable. So I hope people will go to this conference and kind of listen and participate in that kind of discussion of what is necessary to nurture, because there's a lot of good questions to ask, and hopefully there'll be a lot of good answers. And people who are teachers, even if you're not a teacher though, like you can go out and advocate for, we need to have this will be beneficial.
This is it's kind of an epistemology question. How do you know what to present and when to present it so that you get the content across without it being overwhelming?
Yeah, absolutely. So these are your main talk, or the 1893 Chicago World's Fair and the Nurturing the New Romantics.
Yeah.
And then your main opening talk for the whole conference is paintings and romanticism. It's this idea of taking the visual to the verbal. Now, I think this, I don't know, but I often do stuff with Luke Travers where we will he'll surprise me with a poem. Excuse me, a painting. I'll surprise him with a poem. But with the painting, we'll kind of do this verbal description where I'm always the ignoramus who's never seen it, and which I enjoy a lot, actually. And I just kind of describe it, just in, I don't know if I have he has a kind of pattern. I think you have your own different pattern, but it is a very important skill that anybody can learn. Right. Yes. I think that's the important thing. So many people think that you need like an education, as in like a PhD in the history of art or something, and you don't. Yeah. If I can do it, you could do it. It's just asking certain questions. So why don't you tell us and lay out a little bit your view of visual to verbal?
I wanted to say first, somebody in the podcast 2 weeks ago said that she actually prefers Rand's nonfiction to fiction. And there were apparently a lot of people who agreed with that. I think part of that is because you don't get into Ayn Rand if you don't like words and explanations and, conceptualized understanding of what's going on. And there isn't a widespread way to do that with paintings. Does it? I do it. There aren't that many who try and do that. And I think it puts off a lot of objectivists because they can say, I feel really strongly, positive or negative, but they can't pin down why, or they pick on one particular aspect without really looking at the whole thing. I've known people who absolutely hated the movie Dirty Dancing because of that one comment that one kid made about
the Fountainhead.
Yeah. And that's you're messing with priorities, and you don't condemn a whole work for that. Maybe you could condemn the guy who wrote the script. I don't know. Anyway, so let me talk about this. The talk is in 3 sections. Middle section is much longer, but the first section is talking about Ayn Rand's definition of art, sort of from the ground up. If you are an artist facing a blank canvas, what do you do? How do you choose what to put on this canvas? And it's going to come down to your sense of life. This thing that I see is important. This thing that I see, I don't care about. So that's your subject. Depends entirely on your sense of life. And then every single detail is also going to depend on what you think is important. And my method of looking at paintings is based on the fact that the artist is starting with a blank canvas. If he paints a hand like this rather than a hand like this, it means something. And you can say, yes, this means something. And it's not pushing it because he had to put something there. He had to decide what to do. And therefore, the details matter. So the main part of the talk, which I think is half an hour or so, maybe a little bit more, is adapted from my book in progress, Getting More Enjoyment from Paintings That You Love. And it's on getting from the visual to the verbal, as I said. And I have a method that I use my 5 fingers to count on. There's an overview at the beginning. There's a summing up at the end. And in between that, you look at the objects, you look at the subject, you look at the objects, you look at the attributes, which are things like the light, the composition, the colors.
Okay, so you have an order of how you look at this thing.
I have an order,
Okay.
not because you have to buckle in and do, I'm buckling, not because you have to buckle in and do it exactly in this order every time, but because if you don't have some kind of structure, it feels like you can't even start. I mean, for me, it feels like you don't even know where to begin. So when looking at each of those aspects, I state what I see. I state what effect I think it has that the artist included this. And then from those effects, you can go to broader statements. And from a number of statements, once you've looked at the painting in a lot of detail, you can get to the theme. And if you can get to the theme, actually, it's really very easy to read off metaphysical value judgments, including whether man has volition or not, as shown in this painting. But to justify it, you need to work through and be able to get from just looking at it, seeing visual parts, to being able to talk about it. So let me give me the slide Romanticism A. Okay, this is a teaser from the talk. Suppose you don't know what myth is being shown here. Which of these men would you like to be? Guy on the left, guy on the right.
Man, would I like to be?
Which situation would you like to be in? They're both facing.
Guess the left.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
And here's some reasons why I think that's true for most people. The guy on the left, he's got a sort of geometric precision about the way he's posed. His legs are upright and right angles, and there's a triangle here. And he looks like he's leaning forward, talking. So he looks like he's in control of things. The guy on the right, sort of leaning back, it looks like only his spear is holding him up. And he's got this critter latched onto his chest, just gripping him with its claws. So this one is under attack. He's not only under attack, he's just passive. He's not actually doing anything in reaction.
Yeah, on the right.
Yeah.
So okay. Yeah.
So that's a few aspects. I could talk a lot more about this, but
can I ask, so when you so let's say you walk up to is it ingress on the left? Angra, sorry. Angra. I'm super white. I'm super American.
I never pronounce his name because it sounds so pretentious.
Angra. Well, we could try. But yeah, so the gentleman on the left, I do know who these are because I know the mythology, but so like if I'm approaching this and I don't know the mythology, I don't know what's going on, what do you recommend is the first thing a person does? And again, we're talking about somebody who's generally, interested in exploring art, getting out of what you and I are telling them comes out of this, but they don't have a lot of training or experience yet. Right. So is the first thing, because they're not going to have the comparison that you just gave, right? No. They're just going to have the one on the left. What would be the first thing you would tell them to do?
The first thing that I always do is ask myself if I care enough about this painting to stop and look at it. Yeah. Because, I go to museums all the time, every chance I can get. And there are a lot of paintings that just don't care about. If you really like it, and sometimes if you really hate it, but you can't quite figure out why, then it's worth stopping and asking, what is it? What struck me first about this painting? What is it that seems to be making me so emotional about it? And then you can start trying to put it into words. But it's especially helpful if you feel strongly about it. I will sometimes cover up. I'm doing it and you can't see me doing this. Sorry. Cover up half of it and see which half you care about. There's
interesting.
There's a sculpture of a Bacchante, which means a drunken follower of Dionysus, at the Metropolitan Museum in the American Wing. And I love it. And I thought, what? Why? She's drunk and she's dancing, and I don't care about this. She's got this little baby perched on her arm, and she's holding grapes up with her other hand, and this baby is just looking at them. And I can cover up the rest of the figure, and I don't care about it, but I care about that little baby's face. Just, I'm like, wow.
Okay. Interesting.
So
So
that's the useful thing.
yeah, so like for me, and maybe maybe I'm broken and I don't know why. Like I often don't have, so when I'm going through a museum, I'll often see something that piques my interest.
Mhm.
And I don't necessarily have a strong reaction to it. It's not experienced to me as strong personally. It may be like, this is really interesting. Like there was a painting in the Getty of Aeneas meeting Dido, and for the first time from the Aeneid. And I don't remember. I actually have the painting now, and I don't even remember the artist because that's how bad I am. But I love the paint. I love the painting eventually. But when I first saw it, I was just intrigued by the situation. And then as I started asking certain questions and it became more and more apparent, and I started investing a little bit of myself into the story of what was going on, then I had a very powerful reaction. So I'm just curious if you think if some of the powerful reaction might be a training thing and an experience thing, and if an inexperienced person would not have that. Like I've just had this experience with a lot of people that I try to introduce painting to. I dated this girl, and it was basically over after I saw this. I had this big book of amazing paintings, and she flipped through it like it was Cosmo. And I was like, oh, okay. And I was like, come on. Like, I mean, I try to give you the benefit of the doubt, but it's like, come on, you're like, that's like amazing paintings. Not even like for a second. And, I just think like there's a training mechanism that has to happen for people who aren't trained in that. Like we're trained in moving pictures and fast and, that's catch your attention and move on. So I don't know if that's, what you think about that.
I think it can be helpful, but depending on who you've had talking at you, maybe it's not. If it's,
I say,
I think it's very helpful to have somebody else in the museum to bounce things off of. I tend to go with my husband, and then if we go through separately, and then we go to each gallery if we have time and say, what's your favorite painting in here? And I've learned so many things about him by seeing what paintings he picks out, because I have no idea that's what he would do. What I was going to say was, I don't like the term art appreciation, because it always sounds to me like I'm going to tell you what your standards are and you're going to like it. But that's not really the way to enjoy art for yourself. That's a different thing. I mean, I can tell you what the major innovations are in painting, and it can be very helpful if you find that you like a certain period, like the Renaissance. You can go out and find more Renaissance works, but it doesn't mean that you should be in love with all the works that I illustrated in the book. It's that book was made more as a framework, so you can find more things, more periods that you like. It's very useful to have the right person around to tell you things. I think the wrong person could just put you off art in a big way.
Yeah, when you're getting started with it, especially. I agree. Okay. So sorry, I didn't mean to go off on such a tangent. I was just a personal curiosity. But I wanted you to be able to continue. You're going from these two paintings you were discussing, and I went off on this tangent of this one on the left of how, because I do think a lot of people experience it that way. But so I think you were talking about your first reactions to the one on the left. It seems to be more active. The one on the right seems to be more passive. And I'm trying to get back to your process of the visual to the verbal and how you get into that to give people a little bit of a taster of what's going on and what they'll get a lot more of in the actual talk. So we're just kind of teasing the process. I mean, you've written like 5 books on this, given lectures for years. 5 books? 6
I
books?
don't count how many books I write anymore.
Quite a few.
Writing them.
And you have a weekly
It's a good hobby.
newsletter.
And I do
Yeah.
the Sunday recommendations.
Sunday recommendations. So you've been doing this a while. Okay,
yes.
back to you.
Okay, so
going back to that process.
So I would start by looking at, if I were working through this fully and in order, I would start by looking at the body and looking at the face, looking at especially the hands can be very revealing. So I would make a point of looking at those. I would look, if they were dressed, I would look at their clothing, because that can have a big difference. I would look at the background, which is interesting in this case, because the one on the left is in a cave, so it ought to be gloomy. But you can see the sun in the background, and you can even see a little town back there. And there's a man who's running away screaming, which is a very nice foil for our guy who is standing there having a rational discussion with the Sphinx. Mm-hmm. But in the one on the right, it's gray, it's gloomy, it's not in a cave, but there's not another person in sight. And it's just a creepy kind of atmosphere. So all these details go into the message of the painting and your reaction to it. I could discuss this a lot more, but give me Romanticism B.
Well, so are we going to talk about this? Because we have comments in the chat about this, actually. People are engaging with it. So okay. Are you going to tell what the myth is and what's going on a little bit?
I can tell you the myth. I was going to skip to the theme because it's actually 5:46.
Okay, sure.
On my clock. But this is the myth of Oedipus, who is walking on the road to Thebes, and he meets the Sphinx. The Sphinx gives you a riddle. If you get it wrong, she kills you and she eats you. And that's why at the bottom of these paintings, I don't know if you can see, there are body parts.
Yeah.
And bones. And
dead
so
people.
just to remind you of the penalty if you get this riddle wrong.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, continue. I apologize. People are engaged. We do have a $20 question. So I'll ask you that in a little bit. I'll let you kind of finish up what you're saying.
Okay, let me wrap this up real quick. So working through all this, we're skipping a lot of steps, but I can say that the theme of this painting on the left is a man confidently confronts a death-dealing monster. And on the right, a monster, I think it's important to make the monster the subject of the sentence. The monster attacks a man who looks it in the eye but stands passively.
I see. So yeah, when you're verbalizing it, you're really putting it in a formal sentence that kind of conveys what's really going on in this. So it's the man is doing something versus the monster is doing something.
Yeah.
In this case. Yeah. Oh, okay. I like that a lot. Okay.
Okay.
I like that.
And I find if I don't try and put it in a proper sentence, then I haven't really got it nailed down.
Yeah.
So when you get this far to the themes, you can pull out the metaphysical value judgments, which are things like, is man good or evil? Can he know reality? Does he have free will? Can he succeed? So I would say on the left, it shows the world is a place where evil exists. There's the Sphinx, there's the dead bodies, but man can think and act and succeed because he looks like he's going to take action and win, which in fact he does. On the right, the world is a place where evil exists and man is helpless to face it.
Mm-hmm. And that's the passivity part in particular. So he may succeed, and we know from the myth he does, but it's not through his own action in a sense. In the painting on the right, it seems like Moreau is not focused on that part of his character.
No,
which he could, because you could see it on the left. Like you can do that where it looks like you're taking the action and that's how you're succeeding. Yeah.
It's a matter of the exact moment you choose to show. The message that you convey is going to change based on that. Okay, absolutely. That's what I wanted to say about that painting. So tell me questions or comments.
Okay, good. Yeah, so the people were just mostly talking about they were trying to figure out what the myth was. Mm-hmm. And some people thought it was maybe Prometheus. And so they were asking about that. And, was it common knowledge when these were painted? Which, yes, I think that would have been, that myth would have been of Oedipus, would have been that. Now, I do have a kind of separate question. This is our super chat question from Adam Reed.
Hello, Adam.
I don't know if you can answer this. So, Adam, just so you know, I don't think Diane is organizing the event, but I'll just say, so if you don't have an answer, that's okay, Diane. But so what Adam is asking is, do you know why the conference was planned as a North America only event? I would miss Luli Rong. I don't know who that is, or the creators of several Korean TV series. Oh, I think so. He's saying he would miss the TV series to go to this event. It's like, well, you can record it, Adam. I mean, that's the difference between a live show and a TV show, right?
I've gotten some really good recommendations from Adam Reed about TV shows. So,
oh no, yeah, he and Yaron have great TV recommendations for sure.
But yeah, I didn't organize it, so
yeah,
sorry.
Yeah, Adam, at some point maybe you can organize one in a non-North American continent or something, and that can happen. But yeah, so well, thank you though, Adam, for your super chat. We appreciate it. Okay, so the romantic is active. Yeah, I think Bonnie is asking about the romantic part of those two paintings we just saw, and she's saying that now, yeah, I'd like to hear what you said about this. You think about this actually. Bonnie is saying, so the romantic is the active. What would you say to that? Is that the primary differentiator? The active part?
It's whether he looks as if he can act, which is not necessarily, I mean, he's frozen in time. So you can't say that he's doing anything more than he's actually doing. But if you get to the theme and you say this shows a man with volition, okay, put up, this is the end of what I want to say about the romanticism part. Put up romanticism C. Thank you. I thought this would be a useful discussion to put at the end of the very first session of the talk, because romantic doesn't mean the same thing to everybody. In common usage, it's just a love story, a bodice-ripping love story, like on the left. Schopenhauer is considered a German romantic philosopher. And then there's romanticism in the history of painting, which is a relatively short period from maybe 1810 to 1830, 40. There's romanticism in the history of music, which is a little bit earlier than that, probably, and I'm not sure how long you run it. There's romanticism in the history of literature, which is probably 1820s, running into the late 19th century. You have to be really careful about how you use the term romantic if you're not speaking to objectivists. And normally on my website and in the Sunday recommendations, I'm not speaking just to objectivists. So I actually am wary of talking about paintings as romantic paintings. They invited me to give this talk before I had, told them that was true.
Well, I mean, it's part of what you're saying that, like, there's a lot of different definitions. There's a lot of really smart people who've tried to define it. Ayn Rand's one of them, and she maybe has the best philosophical defense, but it is a complex era to try to figure out what exactly happened in this early 1800s, where it was like a tonal shift, but it's in all these different areas, and then we're just kind of calling it romanticism, which is usually just identified as emotionalism, right? And
well, I agree with her definition, but if you're writing something for a general audience, if you're speaking and it might go out to a general audience like this, then I think you need to be clear that it's Ayn Rand's definition is not the only one. And I don't want to get into the concluding comments. The good.
Okay, fair enough.
But I'm not going to get into that.
Yeah, we don't want to spoil your talk. No, don't worry.
No, we do not.
Let me just, we're running up on time. And did you have more you wanted to say about this? Because I had a quote I was going to read to you if I had time.
Yes,
just to maybe be something for you to discuss or think about it, and for everybody else. That's kind of adding to what you just said in terms of how complicated it can be to understand this, but that there is value in discovering it and experiencing whatever we want to call is, I think, easiest definition is 19th century art of all forms. And I would even throw in poetry. That's, it's kind of covered under literature, but it's one that I'm very passionate about. That I think a lot of objectivists don't take as seriously as if they do take art. Because Ayn Rand didn't really write much at all about it. There's very few little snippets, and
she didn't write a lot about painting either.
Yeah, she wrote a lot about painting. She wrote about what her profession and what she was amazing at, and that makes sense.
Yes.
So it's up to us to figure this out. Basically, she can't do everything.
Wordsworth? Is it Wordsworth you're going to read to me?
Yeah. So this is actually Jonathan Wordsworth. So I try to read. This is his great grandson, but he's a professor. He's a scholar of Romanticism and poetry. And I have a whole bunch of these books on Romanticism and the Penguin Book of Romantic Poetry. And he has at the beginning, Romanticism is the mood in which we recognize, in which, quote, we recognize a grandeur in the beatings of the heart, in which we feel that we are greater than we know. It is a value, so that's end quote. It is a valuing of emotion, of imagination, a belief in human potential taken beyond its ordinary limits. What do you think about that as a grand?
I like that.
It's not a concrete, logical definition, but it kind of conveys the mood.
It catches an element.
An element of
it. To be called, yeah.
So I just, when you're looking at all these paintings, you can see that type of thing. And I think in your books you cover this too, and I imagine you're going to cover this in the shift in tone from one, if you go from the 1700s to the 1800s.
Yeah.
If you agree with that. So I guess we'll end with your, last little tidbits on, so you're giving these 3 talks. We have this, event that's occurring, and it's the first time this event's happening. So the more we can get people excited and engaged with this, the more we can do this. And just as a reminder, I did this last show, but there's going to be wonderful music played. There's going to be opera sung. There's going to be new paintings presented. I think the Cordaires are bringing paintings. There's going to be wonderful talks to teach you to get more out of it. So even if you're not already a scholar, you don't need to be, but you'll enjoy more art after you attend this conference.
And also, if you register by midnight tonight on August the 15th, you get a break on the registration fee.
You get a break on the
fee jumps after today.
And I guess I should say the other thing is you'll get to, mingle and hang out with and spend time with other people who are passionate about expanding their artistic understanding of the world. And artistic experiences. Which is a pleasure, a new kind of pleasure that I want to get more people using or experiencing, because I think people don't realize that I do think it's a literal pleasure. It's a pleasure of the mind and the spirit.
Yeah.
And it's wonderful once you really experience it.
It's energizing.
It's energizing. Yeah, definitely can be. And sometimes it can be draining too, but in a good way, right? Like at a great exhaustion type thing.
But something that you look back on and you say, you remember that? That was great. We should do that again.
Also, I just have to say this because you kind of mentioned this with your husband. There's nothing, and again, this is kind of just a pitch to why you should expand your experience with art. Is nothing connects you to other humans more than when you both connect to artwork. I mean, I've just had personally some of my deepest connections with people that remain, it's just like we have the same similar reaction to something,
Yeah.
and it's very powerful. And so who knows, maybe you'll fall in love or something.
Yeah, I mean, it's a sense of life issue. And
Yeah.
sometimes you could be loving it for two different reasons, particular work of art, but
Sure.
very often it's going to be because of something fundamental and really teach you something.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, thank you. Did you have any last thoughts?
No.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for your
I'm all typed
time.
out.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Durante, and make sure to check out her website. What's your URL again?
DianeDuranteWriter.com. Diane
Okay,
with
and that's
two N's.
Two N's, Diane Durante with two N's. It's in the show notes, so make sure you check out that. Also, the Resurrecting Romanticism website, go check that out. October 7th in Spartanburg, South Carolina. So thank you, everybody, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, Kirk.